Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fourth and final career prep seminar of the spring 2021 semester. And today we have Gary Huckleberry with us, who is a geoarchaeologist. He has graduated and got his doctorate from the University of Arizona in the Department of Geosciences, so very exciting. And he was a professor of anthropology at Washington State University for nearly a decade and served as the co-editor of Geoarchaeology from 2007 to 2017. So we're super excited to hear about careers in geoarchaeology. And Gary, go ahead and take it away.
Wow, thank you very much. Yeah, I think even my children couldn't have given me a better introduction, such detail. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm honored to be asked to talk about what I do for a living and sort of my career path. I have to preface it by saying I probably haven't done a traditional career path, however that might be defined, but then life is full of many forks in the road and you never know where you're going to end up. But I kind of have the benefit of having sort of a background both in academia and in the private sector. So I was a full-time professor for 9 years up at Washington State University, but my wife and I sort of left that world and came back to Arizona, and so most of my career actually now has been in consulting work. So I think as students, definitely be flexible on where you're going to, you vision yourself 10, 20 years from now, because you never know where you might find yourself. Life, like I said, throws out many curves in the road, and it's kind of exciting where you end up. So let me share my screen, and I'll give a little PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, so yeah, currently I'm actually an adjunct researcher / lecturer here at the U of A. I teach a class in the spring with Paul Shepard in the Tree Lab called Sense of Place. It's just a 1-credit course. So I don't have an office on campus, so many of you probably have never seen me before. I'm not on there very often, even before the pandemic. But I still get to do a little bit of teaching and meet some of the students, mainly undergrads in that class. But again, today I'm going to talk about geoarchaeology as a profession. I'll preface this by saying, in terms of all the different careers in earth science, this is sort of a niche profession. I can't say the majority of earth scientists go into geoarchaeology, but nonetheless, this is an option. This is a profession for many earth scientists, and both with formal degrees in geoscience, geology, geography, and actually archaeology as well. So some of you may not be familiar with the field, how one might even try to make a living doing it. So maybe I can shed some light on that today. A little background information on me. I am an actual Arizona native, born and raised in Phoenix, and went to Flagstaff, NAU for my bachelor's degree. Didn't know what I wanted to study. I just went up there and started visiting departments, and for some reason, I was a nerdy little kid who loved maps, and I visited the geography department, and they had this cartography program. Back then, you actually hand drafted maps, dating myself. And so I said, well, yeah, I like maps. I'll be a geography major. And then I had a professor who took the time to take me out in the field. My first field experience was actually right at my senior year, working on the Black Mesa Archaeological Project up in northern Arizona. This is right on the Navajo Reservation near Kayenta. And it was the last year of this big archaeological project. And he hired me as his assistant to document soils and try to reconstruct environments associated with these archaeological sites. And so he actually got me interested away from maps. I still like maps, but more into dirt. I really like dirt. I do a lot of dirt. And so he talked me into going on and getting my master's also in geography at the University of Wyoming, where there was a soils geographer who did geoarchaeology, worked with archaeologists and soils. And so I did my master's up there at Wyoming, again in geography. So my bachelor's and master's are actually in geography. Let's see. Okay. excuse me, for some reason, my PowerPoint is not moving well. All right, well, this is the slide I want. So what happened after my master's? I went back to Phoenix. I didn't have a job. I had a master's degree in geography and I studied dirt. It's like, what am I going to do with that? So I actually put on my wingtip shoes and my dress slacks and my Oxford button-down shirt, and I started knocking on doors at archaeological firms in the Phoenix area. So this is in the mid 1980s, and Phoenix was just starting to pull together, are starting to build their freeway systems. And the thing about Phoenix is there's a lot of archaeology. And with all these freeway projects, there was a lot of archaeology being done. I didn't know any of the people down there, so I just started knocking on doors. And this one guy who ran a company called Soil Systems, which I thought was really good because I was interested in soils and archaeology. I told him what I was interested in. He says, yeah, come on in, let's talk. I actually took a geoarchaeology class from a professor up at Washington State University in Pullman. And I would really like to have a geoarchaeologist do some stuff with the work we're doing. In particular, these freeways were hitting canals, prehistoric canals. There are hundreds of miles of these ancient canals in the lower Salt River Valley. And he wanted someone who had sort of a dirt background to do this work. So I ended up working full time with the Soil Systems Incorporated archaeological firm in the 80s and got much more interested in fluvial geomorphology at the time. Because if you want to really understand these canal networks, you got to know something about the rivers that they're tied into. So I didn't have that training in fluvial geomorphology as I would like to have. So after about 3 years of doing contract working as a geoarchaeologist for an archaeological firm, I decided to go back to school for my PhD. And that was probably one of the smarter decisions I did, not so much going back for my PhD, but taking that break in between my master's and my PhD, because after my master's, I was burned out. And if you're not hungry and you don't really kind of know what you want to do, I wouldn't recommend, going on to grad school until you have that confidence and that hunger to go for it. So at that time I did. After 3 years working in the field, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. In terms of where to go, it was a slam dunk, because there were 3 professors down at the U of A that aligned very nicely with what my growing research interest was becoming. And that is Vance Haynes, sort of the Dean of North American Geoarchaeology, Vic Baker, who's still teaching. He's based in the hydrology department. He still teaches geosciences. And then Bill Bull, who's retired, a great geomorphologist, field geomorphologist. So that was the trifecta. With those 3 professors, it's like I cannot go wrong. And I worked hard and I got lucky and was accepted into the PhD program there, even though my master's was in geography. I had to do quite a bit of remedial coursework, but was able to get to the U of A and do that work there. Now, for some reason, my PowerPoint is not advanced. It's delayed for some reason. So I apologize if I'm thrown off here. Okay, so got my geosciences degree at the U of A, PhD, minor in soil and water science. I couldn't get away from the soils. And I did my dissertation on the Gila River between Phoenix and Tucson, because it was an area where I could sort of integrate my interest in prehistoric canals and also fluvial geomorphology. And it was an area that had experienced a lot of environmental change historically and prehistorically. So I started deciding to do my dissertation work there. And while I was done with my coursework, I think I had passed my prelims. I was just kind of working on the DIS. I met with Phil Perthree, who was working at the Arizona Geological Survey, and I shared with him some of the work I was doing. And it ends up some of the work I was doing, which was mapping landforms along the river, coincided nicely with their state map, their geologic mapping program that they had going on. So I ended up working with the Arizona Geological Survey while finishing up my PhD doing surficial geologic mapping. I think Kyle House spoke to you perhaps last month or earlier this semester to talk about some of that work. He's now with the USGS, but that was a great opportunity for me. And I was able to hone my skills even more as a geomorphologist doing that work. Let's see. It seems like there's a 3-second delay on my PowerPoint, and I'm not sure why. There we go. I'll go with that. I got hired after I graduated. I got hired as a professor in the Department of Anthropology. So again, go figure, geography to geosciences to anthropology. Now, this was sort of a special anthropology department because they had a geoarchaeology, excuse me, a position in geoarchaeology. If you remember, that first guy that hired me in Phoenix took geoarchaeology at WSU, and I ended up being a professor there and really enjoyed it. And got to specialize in doing research in Western North America and coastal Peru. Again, looking at geomorphology, climate change, and its impact on ancient societies. And I still continue to do that kind of work. Due to what I call a convergence of family issues, my wife and I quit our academic jobs and we returned to Arizona, where in 2004, and since then, as it was mentioned in my introduction, I was editor of the journal Geo Archaeology for a while, mainly doing consulting work these days, and continue to do some fun research down in Latin America, which is great, ranging from looking at archaeological sites along the beaches at Rocky Point to ancient irrigation networks in the Atacama Desert of Chile. So I feel very fortunate in that I can still kind of play both worlds, both in the private sector and in the academic world, and still publish. See if I've mastered this here. There we go. So that's me. That's my background. What is it that I do? What is geoarchaeology? Simply, just like it sounds, it's mainly the application of earth science methods and perspectives towards archaeology. And you can have, just like in geosciences, there are all these specialties and subfields within it. For example, I'm kind of a big picture guy, geomorphology and soils and climate. So a big aspect of geoarchaeology might be environmental change in paleo landscapes and how that influenced people in the past, or how does it influence, the visibility of the archaeological record today. Predicting archaeological site potential. When I'm out mapping surfaces and landforms, obviously the age of landform will influence where the archaeology is going to be found. If it's a Pleistocene terrace, all the archaeology is going to be up near the top. If it's a Holocene floodplain, then it's going to be buried. Archaeologists want to know that. They want to know, do I have to dig here to test for archaeology, or is it pretty much what I see at the surface is all I'm going to get? So geomorphology can play a big role in helping them with that. Archaeological site formation processes. What we're trying to do in archaeology is reconstruct human behavior from material evidence, artifacts, features. But that behavior, you're looking at an archaeological record that's been modified by disturbance processes, roots and erosion and deposition. What are those physical site formation processes that have occurred since people were there making the record? How has it been transformed by those processes? That's site formation processes, and I often do quite a bit of that when I do my consulting for archaeologists. Materials analysis, for example, geochemistry of obsidian. We get obsidian artifacts. Obsidian is one of those materials that has a very distinct chemical signature. You can actually source to specific outcrops where that obsidian was obtained. And so trying to source materials to determine where they were procured and how they were traded on the landscape. That's another aspect of geoarchaeology. Geophysical prospection, both aerial-based and particularly ground-based, using things like ground penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, things like that to try to predict or identify features beneath the surface that for whatever reason you might not be able to dig there, or you might want to guide where you're going to dig first. So geophysics can be applied to some of this type of work. Geochemical studies, looking at isotopic studies of faunal remains, or looking at isotope geochemistry of soils in terms of environmental reconstruction, our evidence perhaps of agriculture in soils. So various geochemical studies. And then the sort of little thing that I do, kind of my niche within geoarchaeology, is looking at evidence of past agriculture and water management, which I think is interesting not only in terms of the past, but also is relevant in some cases to the present. So where are most geoarchaeologists employed? I would say the bulk of them are employed in what we call cultural resource management, or CRM. So we are fortunate in the United States to have the resources to try and protect, or at least mitigate, damage done to the archaeological record, to cultural resources, because that's a finite resource. And once you dig up an archaeological site, it's gone. It won't come back. So we do have laws, federal, state, tribal laws, to try to at least document the archaeological record before it's destroyed, if indeed development is scheduled. And in Arizona, there's obviously a lot of development going on because we're a Sunbelt state with a lot of population growth. And there's a lot of archaeology down here too. We have a tremendous cultural history. So there are probably half a dozen cultural resource management companies in Tucson alone. There's probably twice that in Phoenix. And so a lot of my clients are these private CRM firms. The one that I worked for between my master's and PhD, Soil Systems, was one of these. So you can work, again, for private companies or government agencies that oversee cultural resource management. For example, projects that are on Forest Service land or Bureau of Land Management lands, they often employ people to oversee the work that's being done. And sometimes geoarchaeology, they might want a geoarchaeologist to help oversee some of that stuff. In general, when one works as a geoarchaeologist per se, it's pretty much at the master or PhD level. If you go in with a bachelor's degree, you'd probably go in just as sort of more part of an archaeologist that might help out with the geology that comes along. But in terms of being sort of more of a focus only on geoarch projects, probably we're looking at a master's or PhD level. The other type of work to do is, if rather than working directly for a company like I did after I had my master's, is to do independent consulting. And that is definitely probably best done at a PhD level. That's not to say there aren't some master level consultants that are independent, but they're rare. And those people end up having to travel a lot. Luckily, I have enough work where I don't have to travel too much. But most of the people that do what I do have their PhD in geosciences or equivalent degree. All right. So yeah. What is it? What are some examples of the work I do? I thought I'd give two case studies of some of the things that I do. And the first one I think is going to focus on is, some of the work I've been doing in Arizona. And a lot of it is in an urban setting where it's really hard to kind of envision what the natural landscape is because it's so built over. This is an example of a dig in downtown Phoenix. But archaeologists are going to want to know what is the geomorphic context here? Again, what's the age of the landform? What type of superficial processes were occurring here? Is this a place one could farm? Is this a place, again, where we might find deeply buried materials? Have these deposits that we find here, have they been modified some way by geological processes? Can they be dated? What sort of geologic methods can we use to date some of these deposits? These are the types of questions and challenges I'm faced with as a consultant when I go on to these projects. Oh, yeah. And then also in terms of the type of data that I might be collecting while I'm out there. Okay, so deep down inside, I'm a soils guy. And so quite often I'm using my soils and geology methods to collect data. All right, so typically the archaeologists will call me up. They have a series of questions they want answered. I make a suggestion for how to collect data to address it. So that often means getting in the trenches, describing the soils, and then if possible, if they have the money allocated for it, collect samples for laboratory analyses. In this example here on the right, I was actually doing an soil isotopic study of C13 stable carbon to suggest possible indications of agriculture, because maize or corn is a C4 plant, different from some of the other natural vegetation in the floodplain. So yeah, very typical. Get called out, I do the field work, I collect sediments, send them off to a lab, wait for them to come back, and then I write up a report. And then that report goes into a volume that eventually gets published, not in a wide circulation, but in a way where information on cultural resources are preserved, and people can access that information. And then in terms of the cultural artifacts and stuff, they get archived into a museum or archived for further study in the future. So here's a case study. I'll start off with, there's two of them I'm going to give. One is purely archaeological. Not sure if any of you are from the Phoenix area, but there's been a lot of urban growth out to the, throughout the Maricopa County area. There was a project when the city of Queen Creek, they were expanding one of the roads there, Riggs Road, and it crossed a known archaeological site that was documented in the early 1900s. And the site was known as Sanoke Ruin, named after Sanoke Wash. But there was an interesting feature that was there at this site. The site is littered with artifacts, but here was this mound. There's a 1949 aerial on the upper left, earthen mound that clearly was not natural. It was cultural. It was covered in prehistoric artifacts. So it was probably built by the Hohokam, who lived in the area from about 1,000 years. But the question was, is it a reservoir or is it a ball court? The Hohokam built these monumental, this public architecture ball courts. And so we weren't sure what might it be? Well, by excavating it and looking at the deposits, they hired me to come out and answer that question. So, and the field work component of this is I worked with the archaeologists in defining how best to mechanically excavate this feature. By the time we got there, that mound was gone. It was plowed over in the 70s for agriculture, which is very common. Most of this archaeology in Phoenix and whatnot has been long ago plowed over, and then we come in later and try to figure out what's going on. So the mound's gone, but we dig where we think the middle and bottom of the feature is. So help with the mechanical excavation strategy, document, interpret the stratigraphy, and lo and behold, we see deposits that it's a no-brainer. This thing was a reservoir, and it's got these beautiful Varve-like deposits. They've got iron staining, typical of fluctuating water table. And so that was one of the key questions. The other one was, how old is it? And so it's like, are we going to use radiocarbon dating? Are we going to try to use luminescence dating? Sometimes you get lucky. We actually found this, we found decorated pottery shown here in the lower right that has been independently tree ring dated down to like a 30 or 40 year period. This pottery dates to about the late 1300s, early 1400s. And it was found right at the bottom of the feature. You don't get luckier than that. So we were able to date this thing, show that it indeed was a reservoir. And then I started relating it to the landscape, placing it on the landscape and figuring out how it collected water. There should have been a canal that was coming in to feed it, harvesting rainwater off of the alluvial fans. Sure enough, we placed trenches upslope and found that canal coming in. Again, knowledge of the geomorphic setting was critical for trying to identify that. And then started kind of playing around with some models about how much water it could harvest, how much it could hold, and then present a report to the archaeologists discussing what this feature was and how critical it was for this year-round settlement, because it was an area where there was no other perennial water. This was their key source of water. This area here in Queen Creek is too far away from the Salt River or the Gila River to get canal water, so they had to rely on rainfall harvesting. And rainfall harvesting, let's face it, today that's getting a lot more of attention. I think some of these prehistoric examples of rainfall harvesting are interesting and might serve as analogs for municipalities who are interested in doing more of that. All right, so let's do the second case. Second case is more what I call sort of applied geoarchaeology, and it's addressing a sort of more a current problem. In this case, it has to do with water rights. Now, I was asked to participate as an expert witness in a water rights case in New Mexico on behalf of the Laguna Pueblo. This is a Puebloan community that dates back to at least the 1300s, that is located west of Albuquerque on a very small drainage shown here in this historical photo of the Rio San Jose. And this is a classic example of water rights being taken away from Native Americans by competing interests over the centuries. So today, a lot of this water in the Rio San Jose has been diverted upstream for mining by farmers, other farmers, and so they have to fight for their water rights. And these are agricultural people. They sort of define themselves culturally in large part as farmers, and to take away their water is not only a threat to their subsistence, but also to their identity. So it was it's an opportunity for not just geoarchaeologists, but archaeologists to work with the tribe to try to help them with their water rights. Well, how might that happen? In the West, water law is sort of based on first priority claim. If you can demonstrate that you first were using the water for benefit, then you have priority access to that water. Well, let's face it, folks. Obviously the Laguna here they've been here before most of the other groups. Certainly before the Euro-Americans came in. But you have to show it. In a court of law, you need to say, here's evidence of use of this water. And of course, the written records don't go back hundreds of years. In terms of their agricultural features, they really are only written down back maybe 100, 150 years. So can we see in the landscape, can we see evidence of water management by the Laguna Pueblo? And so I was hired to work with an ethnoarchaeologist, TJ Ferguson, here at the U of A, to identify some of these reservoirs that are located along the Rio San Jose. And these reservoirs are actually recent enough that they're recorded, at least in the early 1900s, but some of them were already abandoned by the early 1900s. And the question becomes, when were they constructed? One of them was constructed in the 1930s with help of the federal government. So that one, not an issue. But there was these other ones, Laguna, Pueblo Reservoir, and then this Casablanca Reservoir. And so geoarchaeology was a great way to sort of understand, are these things actual reservoirs? Are they not, make sure they're not natural lakes? And how old are they? So again, the fieldwork was an issue of surveying the area with tribal elders and archaeologists, trying to select localities where we may actually dig down and look at the deposits. If we can, document dams at the surface and any natural exposures of reservoir stratigraphy, and then develop a sampling plan, which in this case was a combination of luminescence, optically stimulated luminescence dating, and radiocarbon dating. And just to kind of give you a shot here, as a geologist, I'm always taking cross sections and things. So, lay it out there. What are the landforms? What are these deposits? Can these be, could this be a natural deposit or a reservoir? I have to be honest with you, when you're an expert witness in a case like this, your work is going to be challenged by others. And one of the other stakeholders had an expert witness, a geologist, who claimed that these deposits, these reservoir deposits, were natural. Caused by a mid-tertiary basalt across the floodplain. Not mid-tertiary, but I think it was maybe Pleistocene, yeah, because the volcanics are young there. But anyway, hundreds of thousands of years old. And so we had to show, no, that's not the case. And you have to use scientific data, evidence to show that. So here's a cross-section of some of the landforms and deposits. Here's a natural cut, actually showing this is cool because it shows this historic masonry dam that the Laguna constructed. This is sort of the underlying natural soil. Here are the reservoir deposits. These deposits were ostensibly, they're too young to really use radiocarbon dating, because when you calibrate dates that are only maybe 200, 300 years old, the calibration's all over the chart. But luminescence dating was a method that we could use. And indeed, we were able to show that this reservoir was probably constructed in the early 1800s. So not going real far back in geologic time, but nonetheless, we now have some evidence to show it goes back at least into the early 1800s, which now we can use in the court of law. The other thing, well, as I'm wont to do, I analyze the data, write it up, submit a report to the law firm. Now, in this case, the lawyers representing the Laguna were very supportive of us publishing this work. Now, often in these water adjudication cases, they go on for years, and the data are often kind of kept secret and not released to the public. We were so confident about our work, the Laguna Pueblo said, yeah, let's get this out and let's show to the judge and everyone that we have confidence in our work, and it can be, and it's actually of quality that can be accepted in peer-reviewed literature. So we published the work in the Journal of Arid Land, or excuse me, Journal of Arid Environments, and used this to sort of oppose other expert witness reports. So that was my main role here. I also was able to advise the legal team at depositions when they were questioning the other expert witnesses. And in this case, this actually never ended up going to a trial. It just went to the information stage where there are a lot of depositions. But if it had gone on to the trial stage, then I would have been called in to testify actually in a court. But I think they were able to settle out of court in this case. So what are the key skills I think that one would need for this? Probably overlaps with other fields of geosciences. Very important to be able to communicate both verbally and in writing. All right, so we can't stress enough the writing skills, because much of what I do is writing technical reports. And so I need to write efficiently and effectively. I think anyone who does geoarchaeology is going to have an enthusiasm for field work, because that's a big part of it. And a lot of it is not really sexy. I get called up to Phoenix in the middle of summer to go out in some alfalfa field and climb in and out of trenches all day, looking at soils and stratigraphy. And it can be, some of that can be pretty monotonous, as well as physically taxing. So sometimes I'm called up on the high country in the wintertime when everything's frozen. So you've got to have an enthusiasm for field work. I don't know of many geoarchaeologists who just strictly work from the office. It's a little bit of both. You have to be a team player, and you're going to be working with archaeologists. You're going to be working with, in some cases, Native Americans. And so you need to really sort of understand what the archaeologists in particular are interested in. As a geologist, I might say, oh, this is really interesting, in terms of the depositional processes, which is really more of a geological interest, whereas that might all be well and good to them, but they really have specific archaeological questions. And can I apply my earth science to answer those questions? I need to know what they're interested in and be able to work with them as a team. And then willing to travel. I do most of my work, consulting work, in Arizona and New Mexico, but for many geoarchaeologists, they're traveling all over the country. So, especially when you're starting out, you have to really be willing to travel and work in different environments. So that's another key skill. Important courses, if one wanted to pursue geoarchaeology, there are quite a few. Some of them are, I think, required as a geoscience undergraduate major. Excuse me. But obviously mineralogy is important, sedimentology, stratigraphy. In terms of more of the electives, geomorphology, quaternary geology, those are courses offered in the department that I think are key. Environmental history of the Southwest is a nice one, because it sort of integrates sort of the archaeology and environment and surface processes. So that's a great course. Environmental archaeology, okay, environmental archaeology, I think that's one that's offered by Vance Holliday, who has a joint appointment in geosciences and anthro. That's a really good course to get a feel for what geoarchaeologists do, and you could take as an undergraduate. And then I put field school anthro. So in geosciences, you have to have a field school. That's good. I would strongly recommend a field school that archaeologists provide, because that way, I mean, they're different, and you will get a feel for, you'll get skills that really are more applicable to archaeological sites than geologic mapping. So I definitely would recommend doing a field school during the summer that's offered through an anthropology program, an archaeological field school. And then graduate level, Vance actually does a geoarchaeology graduate level course. Advanced, there are probably more than one, a couple different advanced geomorphology courses. Advanced soils, Craig Rasmussen over in the soils program has several classes that I think would be very useful. Quaternary geochronology, if you can dare take this course from Jay Quaid, if you master that, you can write your own ticket. I've heard stories about that one, but you take that course and boy, do you have a skill set that you can apply in different ways, including geoarchaeology. Archaeometry, Dave Killick over in anthropology offers an archaeometry course looking at more things like material analysis, metals, and stone. And then statistics. That's always something that's something I wish, if I had to do it all over again, I would have taken more statistics. And then finally, other recommendations. And this, I'm sure you've heard before, you're going to want to network. You're going to talk to faculty. You're going to talk to graduate students who are perhaps pursuing their studies in geoarchaeology. Attend meetings. Once we get through this COVID thing, we can hopefully get back to meeting in person and just out in the hallway and introduce yourself and talk about what your interests are. That can be nerve-wracking, but it's so important. You can volunteer. Unfortunately in geoarchaeology, we don't have internships per se, but I've had some grad students shadow me in the field. I can't pay them, but I can interact with them and share some of the things that I do. And they just shadow me for a couple of days out in the field and get a feel. And that way you might get an idea of what it is a geoarchaeologist does and whether or not this is something, you might want to pursue. And then finally, the Geological Society of America actually has a geoarchaeology division. And that's a great resource for talking to other students of geoarchaeology and also seeing where different programs are for field schools, for graduate school, and just get an idea of what's going on both nationally and internationally in terms of geoarchaeology. So that's a good reference. All right, I think I have talked enough. I want to open this up, so I'm going to stop my screen share here. And I think we're back in business. Can everyone see the Zoom screen again? All right, Shauna says yes. Okay, so any questions or comments?
I actually have a question. I'm an undergrad in natural resources who's done a lot of the things that you've recommended, and I have a lot of overlapping interests. I'm hoping to go into the Peace Corps. I have a summer job doing field work, and I'm willing to travel, interested in water issues and things like that. But is working an environmental and political career for these agencies, is that a career you'd recommend to a young professional?
I'm not sure if I follow, Anna. Political and administrative?
So some of the courses I'm in are in environmental law, ornithology, things like that. And I'm interested in pursuing conservation either with the Forest Service or through the park system. Is this type of a career like a career that you feel like you've made a difference in and a career that you'd recommend to a current undergraduate?
Geoarchaeology, you mean?
More like broad scale Southwest conservation.
Yeah. In the end, I'm going to get philosophical here. it's a matter of looking forward to the day when you wake up in the morning. And if, when I think about what I did, I certainly could have made more money going into hydrogeology or economic geology or something of that sort. But I went into sort of this sort of niche field that there are not a lot of people employed in it, but you can make a living doing it. And it sounds like kind of what you're thinking about is similar. It's not a formalized discipline per se. It may be, I don't know, but
You're totally on it. I'm planning to study aquatic insects in the Santa Cruz River, and it's a super niche issue.
right. So, can one make a living doing that? I would think that the answer is yes, because if you really like what you do, you're going to be good at it. And there are firms that, water resources is a huge issue in dry land environments. There are environmental firms here in town that have biologists who are dealing with aquatic systems. Is it a hot job market? Probably not. But I guarantee you, if you are aggressive and you really love your work, you will make it happen. You may have to travel a while. You might not be able to find a job in Tucson. But if you're young and you're willing to move around and do stuff, I would say follow your bliss and pursue this. And I think obviously having the Peace Corps to go with it, that gives you other skill sets that you just can't get anywhere else. So yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's very reassuring. And I hope that a career is something that people my age are still hoping to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, money's important, but it's not as important as liking what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question if you don't mind, Gary.
Yes, Ben.
I noticed, so like you said, money is in fact important. You said that there weren't a lot of internships in the field and that you did a lot of shadowing. Is there any alternative to that where you could get some form of compensation if you couldn't swing just like not being able to work for that period of time?
Not that I know of. I mean, in terms of the people I know doing geoarchaeology, you're either doing it in the field with the archaeologists. I mean, you might work, temporarily on a project for a month or two and then be off and then come back. But in terms of any sort of internship or any sort of other thing that'd be kind of part-time, I'm not aware of anything, unfortunately, like that. The only thing I could suggest is, the federal government, sometimes the National Park Service or something, they have summer programs that are related to archaeology. And if you made the argument that, I mean, if you had the archaeology field school and you said, plus, I'm very much interested in geoarchaeology, I think that would be really attractive to the Forest Service or Park Service, and having someone do a summer internship program there in archaeology, but that geo sort of skill set gives you a leg up. To me, I think it would.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, has anyone heard of geoarchaeology or taken a geoarchaeology class before this webinar?
No, I had never taken a class or even heard of it, really.
Well, then I am very, very honored to be here today to spread the wisdom, spread the gospel, because yeah, I mean, once you specialize in something, you like what you do, you like to toot your horn, you like to brag about the profession and stuff. So, that's my concern. Geosciences is a big department. There are all kinds of great programs there, and I always kind of wonder how much does GeoArch get advertised. So this is my chance to advertise a little bit. Obviously there are faculty there that work with archaeologists. Well, it's Vance Holliday, of course, his main office is in Anthro, but Jay Quaid, and Andy Cohen, they have been collaborating with archaeologists for decades, doing great research, particularly in Africa. So, I mean, if you want to talk to some faculty that are in the program that you may know, since I'm not around, Yeah, been the year of Jay or Andy or some of those folks, and that would be a good resource.
I'll actually 100% plug Andy for a second. For any of you that were at the SES meeting, you know I was late. It was because I was staying after paleo today because Andy brought a bunch of hominid skulls. And he's perfectly willing to talk to people about it. I stayed and talked to him about it for probably like 20 minutes after class. And even then I was like, do you have more? And he was like, yeah, come by my office. So
let me tell you this, how many paleolimnologists bring hominid skulls into their classes? You know, that is what makes U of A so cool. Thanks, Brianna. Thanks for saying that.
yeah.
All right, and if there aren't any more questions, we'll let Dr. Huckleberry get on with his day here.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. It's Friday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And thank you again, Gary. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye-bye.
Me.